gummy bear.
It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this for March 18th, 2024. For the next hour or so, let me help you sort through the world of gaming on Game Mess Mornings Live with me, Jeff Grubb. Today, details leak about the next PlayStation, while another piece of Sony hardware apparently rots on the shelf. But first, please join me in welcoming today's co-host of Game Mess Mornings. It's Emma Fyffe, everybody. Emma, how are you doing?
I am well. I was away last week visiting with my family, and I got a stomach bug about halfway through the week. So
you got a real good time.
What a joy! What a joy! But I'm better now. Unfortunately, it happened like 2 days after my birthday, so I basically got to go. I visited with my family a little bit, got to see my niece, and then had a nice birthday. During dinner, I was completely upstaged by my niece, who was in rare comedic form that evening. And then, got sick and then just kind of like laid in bed until I felt well enough to drive home. Both my fiance and I were sick. So we were real fun. We were real fun last week.
That's a good time. Okay, but the recovery seems like it's fully taken root. You're good to go?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm back in action, baby. Ready to do this Monday thing.
As weird as it is. Yeah, I made a decision last night at some point where I was like, I got the kids are in bed. I could go see Doom 2 at the movie theater.
It's long.
And I did the 1040 showing, so I could go see the IMAX show. And Limax, whatever.
Limax,
yeah. And it was like, well, okay, 1040, and then of course I'm like, well, that's gonna be like 15 minutes.
It starts until like, at least 11. Yeah.
It started at like 11:10. It was like a full like half an hour. Yes, of commercials and all that stuff. So yeah, that was one thing. But the movie was very good, and I did not doze off or anything. Just sat there and enjoyed the whole thing. So that was a very good time. But I did get home and get to sleep at like 3 a.m. basically after everything was said and done.
Ooh.
So it was a choice, but I don't regret it. Except for
right.
I do fully regret it, just the way I feel right now.
Yeah.
Yes, but it was a good movie at the very least.
Great movie. Yeah.
Now the troublesome thing here is like now I'm like, okay, well I made myself very tired, susceptible to maybe getting sick, and of course PAX is later this week, so we'll see how I roll the dice and how I pay for it later. In the meantime, let's explain what we do here. Most weekdays, I, Jeff Grubb, will help piece your gaming life back together. That includes breaking news and maybe even some of our own original reporting. For all these topics, I'll get the input of a bona fide expert who will make me look smart. If you are watching live on Twitch, welcome. You can always listen to the show later on podcast feeds by searching for Game Mess Mornings or find the RSS on giantbomb.com. You can also catch the show later with chapters and timestamps on YouTube. Hello, YouTube. All right, we have a lot to get into, so let's get started with PS5 Pro's specs have been leaked with improved GPU and upscaling. This is from Chris Scullion at VGC. Documentation explaining the console's specifications was initially leaked by YouTuber Moore's Law is Dead, before being detailed by Insider Gaming, then verified by IGN, which says the document comes from Sony Interactive Entertainment's developer network. The specs suggest that the PS5 Pro's CPU will be identical to that of the standard PS5, but that the new console will have a high CPU frequency mode, which increases the CPU by 10% to 3.85 gigahertz, but reduces GPU performance by around 1% as a result. The GPU itself will be powered by 33.5 teraflops versus the PS5's 10.28 of teraflops, but this doesn't mean it will be more than 3 times as powerful, not necessarily. As The Verge notes, changes in AMD's architecture means it's difficult to directly compare teraflops directly between the PS5 and the PS5 Pro, and that in reality the comparison is more like 10.28 versus around 17 teraflops. Indeed, the documentation leaked by Moore's Law is Dead suggests rendering is about 45% faster. The console's apparent upscaling and anti-aliasing features are also listed in the specs, named PSSR, which stands for PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. A hell of a name. It's believed this could be the proprietary DLSS-like solution discussed last year by Giant Bomb reporter Jeff Grubb. Last month, CNBC cited a number of games industry analysts who reportedly said they expect Sony to launch a PlayStation 5 Pro console later this year. Yeah, this thing seems very likely to be coming out this holiday. We first originally heard about a PS5 Pro, Emma, sometime last year in that maelstrom of there's a PS5 revision coming that will be a slim model without a disc drive. We got that. There would be a PlayStation portable sort of thing that you take with you, and it could stream games, and that was the Portal, and that happened. And then at the same time, we heard about the Pro, and now we're getting these specs right before GDC now GDC is here, right as GDC is starting, when almost certainly a lot of developers are going to be talking to one another. This was going to leak this week. I think this feels like, okay, PlayStation, let's just go put the information up on our developer portal, let all the developers know, so they know what they're hearing is true, and it's not like some weird thing they're hearing the secondhand at GDC. Let's just get it out of the way. We know this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So a lot of it's lining up to feel like, yeah, this is definitely true, and it probably will come out this holiday. How do you feel first about a more powerful PS5?
So my thing about it is it's kind of the way I look at these consoles and their like 0.5 upgrades is it's kind of like iPhones. You know, if you are there for the, iPhone 14S or whatever, and you haven't gotten a 14 already, awesome. That's absolutely what I would go for. But frankly, we're getting into the territory of like the human eye actually can't detect anything better, in terms of graphics performance. And games have gotten so good at hiding their minimal load screens that it's like, I don't even notice anymore. So it's like, I think that this is something that people will purchase? Absolutely. And there are people who are, more of tech heads than I am. Like, for example, not specifically in the realm of PlayStation, but, with my dad, he's such a technology head that it's like, he always gets like the next thing. Though with iPhones, he chooses to skip them sometimes. But anyway, it's like, great. I love that they're putting out an enhanced machine. Good for them. If it's going to cost money that you could be, paying, now the cat's really got opinions on this. He's like, excuse me, I want an upgraded PS5. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know. My PlayStation 5's running great. I'm super happy for people that want to get this that don't already have a PS5, assuming that it is actually available in reasonable quantities at launch.
Yeah, I think that you're right to say that this is for a certain audience that shows up on day one. The nerd tax that we often pay if we do get excited about new hardware. Like, we're going to be right there, and there's a huge segment there, millions of people who count themselves among like, hey, I want the new thing no matter what, regardless of how much use I got out of the last one, whatever. I just want to be on the cutting edge. And that's who these devices are always meant to monetize. I mean, Nintendo's done this for years and years, going back generations. The Game Boy Color kind of being a very good example of like, hey, we're really going to introduce a new feature and give you a reason to get excited. It was still a Game Boy underneath.
100%.
So it's like that. Then they did that repeatedly, and the person that these things sell to is the person who buys a system on day one and is the most likely to give these companies money. So of course they're taking advantage of that. As far as like the draw here, I think, 10% more powerful in the CPU, like the CPU being the same is not surprising at all because they want to keep compatibility between the PS5 and the PS5 Pro. So they were never really going to switch up the CPU. That's the Xbox Series X and S use the same CPU for a very similar reason. So them coming in with a huge improvements to the GPU, likely having a little chiplet on the GPU for driving this PSSR feature, which is probably going to use AI technologies to upscale stuff. That makes sense as well. It's something that the original PS5 probably couldn't do without causing more performance issues. So, kind of focusing on that makes some sense. I just don't know what the marquee feature is here because nowhere in this reporting and in this documentation is Sony really talking about 8K. And I think they know that that's a non-starter, that most people will be like, I just bought a 4K TV If I'm honest with myself, I barely see the difference between that and 1080p in many circumstances.
Exactly.
And I think people are going to like, I am not going to buy into the 8K thing. I think it's already come and gone, and people are not going to do that. So what does Sony come out of the gate with this? I think it will be this upscaling stuff. So that means, hey, more of your games will actually run at what looks like 4K and 60 frames per second. And I think there will be a lot of people who are excited about that. It's just not as easy as when the PS4 Pro came out and they're like, this will do 4K. The other thing couldn't do 4K. This can do 4K. This one's going to be a little bit more difficult to market. And yet I think it's probably going to stand just about as good a shot as the PS4 Pro did at selling. The PS4 Pro never sold better than the standard PS4. This probably won't ever sell better than the standard PS5. But still, this makes sense for them and for a bunch of other reasons. For one, it keeps them like in good cahoots with AMD to make sure that they're like stepping along the architecture there and improving things and getting things ready for the next console. And speaking of getting things ready for the next console, no price detailed here. This like we've talked about previously, this could very easily set up the price for the next system, where this thing is actually $600, so that when the PS6 comes out and is around $600 or more, it's like they've already stepped us up that ladder. So I get why it's happening.
Sure.
Emma, the other question though is like, boy, this feels strange in a year when PlayStation has already told us they're not going to have any sequels to their main franchises. So it's like there's a dearth of games, and yet they want us to buy more hardware. And I will, probably, but I don't get it. What do you think?
I truly, that is the thing that confuses me about Sony's strategy in general for this year, as you say, because, obviously they have exclusivity deals with studios like Square Enix. Obviously, they had a huge launch earlier this year, just last month with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. But as far as what's coming up on the PlayStation 5 this year, it is kind of like I don't know, because we're just in a year where we don't have a lot of confirmed dates for big AAA kind of title game releases anyway.
Right.
So instead, they're leading into hardware, like buy this new hardware to play no new games. Yeah,
and it's like, so what do they pair it up with? I mean, they probably will have some stuff. But my biggest concern is I'm a huge fan of the Astrobot games. The Astrobot games are always paired with new hardware.
Yes,
I was like, we're gonna get a new Astro this year, which I've repeated this a bunch of times. I've heard we're getting a new Astro this year. And
I better be able to get it on my regular PlayStation 5.
I do not. I'm really hoping that like the big thing for PS5 Pro isn't some bundled Astro thing that only works on there to show us upscaling. That's. I hope that's not what happens. But beyond that, it's like, what they'll do is have some definitive edition of Spider-Man 2. They will have a bunch of these games that have already come out on PS5, and they'll do their best to dress them up and be like, look at how much better they are on the PS5 Pro. And that'll be nice for some people, especially people who are super into that ecosystem and are playing those games over and over again.
Sure,
but I bet it would help if they had some big new game to push it alongside of, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. But this thing coming out this holiday, I guess the other discussion here is, how does Xbox respond? Clearly, they've said a bunch of times now that they don't intend to release a 0.5 console. I mostly think I believe them on that, but I wonder if they're going to try to do the leapfrog thing, so this comes out the end of 2024, right? And then by 2026, PlayStation's not going to have like something to like the PS6 at that point, but Xbox could have the next Xbox at that point. Does that sound to you like how things will play out?
Yeah, I mean, because as you say, what else is Xbox strategy going to be? And Xbox is an interesting case in particular because, as I've said many, many times before on this show, on other shows, Xbox is, it seems, mostly in the business of selling Game Pass. So the idea is, you have an Xbox like the Series S, that you have at an affordable price point. You get the console in the home, you get people on Game Pass, and then people will also start buying additional titles because now they like video games. But at the same time, they are still in this war. And again, war in quotes of the consoles, if you will. But by and large, nowadays, the price point of consoles is very and it's always been prohibitive. There was a period of time where, certainly when I was growing up, usually had one or the other. So I have to imagine that this is a situation wherein Microsoft has the opportunity to focus solely on developing their next generation of consoles, as they're not intending to do a 0.5 at all. So, they skip that and they can just put all of their effort into their next thing. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I could see an Xbox having a Xbox Series 2000, I don't know, by let's say holiday season 2025.
Yes, I mean, at the very least, Microsoft had that whole hubbubaloo earlier this year where they started putting games on PlayStation and people were freaking out. So they had their podcast responding to it. And in that podcast, Sarah Bond and Phil Spencer, to a point, said, we will have something to announce about new hardware later this year. And then they also said at the same time, and we're also working on the next Xbox, which will be the biggest technical leap. I forget how they're putting it, but this is a fair paraphrase. The biggest technical leap that we've ever seen for a console, which won't be true. Just simply won't be true. I was alive for the N64 to GameCube and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Whatever. But yeah, they're making big promises about the next hardware. So they are going to be in the hardware game in some way. And I think that means this holiday we get something announced along the lines of a revised Xbox Series X that has more storage, maybe doesn't have a disk drive.
Sure.
We'll see. That stuff that leaked in the FTC filings. We saw some of that stuff before. Those plans have likely changed, but there will be some modified version of that. And then, we get to late 2025, and they probably have maybe a new announcement around then as well for something that's going to happen very quickly after, sometime in 2026. But getting back to the PS5 Pro before we move on to the next story, this PSSR, this is like upscaling, and I think that this technology is still pretty exciting. I will say that on the PC side of things, paying attention to that, there's been some backlash because the implication or the idea a lot of people get in their head, and I think this is mostly incorrect, but it probably in some cases maybe it does happen. But fans are getting in their heads that developers are, instead of optimizing their game, they're just slapping on DLSS, which is going to lower the internal resolution, rebuild that image back up to where it should be, and then that gets you better frame rate. And so they're just doing that instead of making the game better. And it's like, so the magic's already kind of been lost of like what this technology is, that people are already jaded by it. So I'm like, I just wonder if this is going to be the thing that can really help the PS5 Pro stand out. And really, I mean, Emma, when you're looking at like games that they're trying to sell us, they already look about as good as they need to look in most cases, right? I just don't know how they're going to be able to market this very effectively.
I'm in complete agreement with you. Like, I know that other people have had some performance issues, and we had, this discussion when we were doing our non-spoiler review of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth specifically, that there have been some performance issues, but it's like I play in performance mode, not graphics mode. And honestly, like I can't tell, when it's changing the scaling to like keep the images stable. And also, we talked about the fact that it's like, I treat the camera like a camera, like as if I were pointing an actual camera and filming to like keep my camera movements minimal, and so it's not all Blair Witchy. But I just I can't see better than I see, and everything looks good.
Yep. I mean, honestly, I think I always point this out as the game that made me realize games don't need to look much better than this. And that's like Doom in 2020 or in 2016. I was like, this game runs so well on anything. It looks fantastic. The art is incredible. You kind of don't need to get much better than this, in my opinion. And I think since then we have plateaued in a lot of ways. That's when a lot of GPUs for this PC came out that would run games at 1080p 60 kind of no matter what. And those GPUs to this day still run most games. You're gonna have to turn down some things these days, but most games still run at about 1080 60 with those same GPUs. Not nearly as many as like 2 years ago, but still that's just like, we kind of plateaued. And that's why they started pushing 4K and ray tracing and all these other things, because they just weren't going to be able to get much more out of 1080p 60. A year after launch, PlayStation has reportedly paused PSVR2 production due to low sales. This is from Chris Scullion at VGC as well. Sony has reportedly paused production of PlayStation VR2 just 1 year after launch so it can deal with a backlog of unsold units. A new report from Bloomberg claims that PlayStation VR2 shipments have been getting progressively smaller every quarter since the headset launched in February 2023, and that Sony has now paused production altogether. The report cites research firm IDC, which tracks deliveries to retailers rather than consumer sales, and which says Sony has a surplus of assembled PSVR 2 headsets throughout its supply chain. PSVR 2 was released in February 2023 at $550, but Sony has still yet to officially confirm how many units it has sold to date. Well, I guess IDC has a little bit more here. Previous estimates by IDC suggested sales had started slowly, around 270,000 units sold by the end of March 2023, but Sony later claimed that PSVR 2 had sold around 600,000 units during its first 6 weeks of availability. Kind of like one of the least surprising stories of the last year, right?
100%.
We got PSVR 2 announced. There just wasn't a lot of games to get excited about. Everyone's like, this hardware is impressive. Tell us more about the games. And Sony's like, yeah, we will. And then they never really had much else to go along with the hardware. And now here we are. People aren't excited about it. People have mostly, honestly, from where I'm sitting, seems like people have forgotten about it. What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that the people who are really into VR would get an Oculus or now a Meta Quest. Yeah. Because that runs games on its own.
Yes. Quest 3 is all around. Like they sent a Quest 3 around the time I was thinking about the PSVR 2.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm very, very happy with the Quest 3. So it can run games independently on its own. Yeah. But then it also has a really, really good Wi-Fi 6E, whatever it is, the 6 gigahertz connection to my Wi-Fi router, so I could stream from Steam wirelessly, Steam VR, and I can run all the games off my PC as well. And it's it's kind of flawless. So it's like I'm just not interested. Like $550 is not that much for a PSVR or for a VR headset, all things considered. But compared to the Quest 3 and what it can do, and I know PlayStation or Sony has started saying that they might try to get it working on PC this year. That's great. I just too little, too late for me is kind of where I'm at with that. What do they do now with the PSVR 2, Emma?
Drop that price point way down, and then it's like obviously they can't drop it down to be in the realm of like a controller, but it's an accessory for the PS5. You need the PS5 to run the PSVR 2, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Like, so you're pricing it practically the same as getting the console in the first place.
I mean, honestly, more expensive in a lot of cases because the PS5's been on sale so much in the last year that if you were buying it today, you would look at the 2 and be like that for many weeks and be like, wow, the PSVR 2 is more expensive. And again, where are the games? They're not coming out.
And that's the other part of it is it's like you have to have something that is so appealing that it is exclusive to the PSVR 2. It's just, it doesn't exist, like.
Yep. And it seemed like from the beginning that Sony was not investing in the PSVR 2, even in the way it did in the PSVR 1. There were a lot of games that came out exclusively to PSVR 1 for at least some time. And it was like Sony out there making deals constantly. Now, in Sony's defense, I think here a little bit, there simply aren't as many VR developers as there were around the time of the PSVR 1. That ecosystem is mostly dried up. But one of the reasons it seemed to dry up is Sony wasn't there handing out money either. So, yeah, they could have done something.
And VR is such an interesting thing because it's like, we have these conversations about, what is, these next generation consoles, like upscaling the resolution in 8K and blah, blah, blah. And all of those things are like tangible. And we go, okay, yes, totally. But I think that by and large, we've gotten to a point with like hand video games you play with a controller on a screen that they already, as you said earlier, look kind of as good as they need to look. They look super realistic. The issue with VR is that it's not at an immersive level of interactivity because of the restrictions of having to be in a confined, defined space to do your VR games. And, the way you travel in VR games, you're not actually walking, which is what causes a lot of people motion sickness, which is why they often have that, teleportation option as opposed to guiding yourself. So you get the impression you're going forward, but you're actually just standing still. The only way that VR works for me, and I'm 100% on board with, is when you do those ones where you're in a rat maze.
Yeah, 1-to-1.
But it looks like you're on an Imperial ship on Mustafar. The Star Wars one was unbelievable. Yep. But I get to walk around. I get to hold a plastic thing that resembles a blaster, and it works. And I feel the heat when I, step outside and I'm looking at a volcano. So it's VR to me needs that level of immersion to really make it awesome. And that is simply not possible on a consumer level that you can have in your home.
Yeah, I think there was an early VR game when I got the Vive Pre. I remember I remember going to GDC a long time ago, and this was when VR was popping off, and I was trying to get a meeting with Valve, so they would send they were sending people Vives, and I couldn't get in there, or I got busy, I got distracted, and I kind of wrote an email to Chet Felichek, who's a writer at Valve, because he was overseeing this, and I'm like, man, I couldn't get in there. It's bummed. Kind of want to talk to you guys. I want to see if I can maybe get a Vive Pre, and he just sent me a link, and it was click this. We'll send you one. I'm like, okay, incredible. Cool. So I got that. I was testing early. Yeah, he's a great guy. I was testing early VR games, and there was one where it's this experience. It's like an escape room sort of thing. And the way it worked is you would be always walking physically through your world. Right. And it would kind of cut these rooms in half. It'd be okay, can you get through this paneling on the wall? Can you find the screwdriver to unscrew this paneling? And then you can get down real world and crawl through. And then now, since you've come on this side of the wall, of this virtual wall, we've changed what's over here. And now you just keep looping around, and it keeps changing. And but that had a certain size requirement to even function. And me, as someone who had prepared and had a pretty decent sized setup for VR in his home, and even I had to start moving things to make it even bigger, because this whole concept just wouldn't work in a slightly smaller space. And it's that is just, talk about non-starter, that is a non-starter for the vast majority of people who would be interested in this thing. And really, you're doing that for an experience that people are that is an experience. Sure. That's not what I'm talking about when I want to get excited about a video game in VR. I still want a full game thing. And it's okay, there's so many difficult ins and outs to making that happen with VR. And clearly we've seen it's kind of not happening in many ways. So
just want to play Beat Saber, and that's it. A chat to address your question. My cat was tunneling in the blankets behind me. He loves to be underneath stuff. And yes, the other cat is kind of just out of frame over on my right hand side.
Pound the blanket in a rhythmic mode to have the sand cat come out.
No, literally, that was the thing. Yes, exactly. To summon Shy Cat Lude.
yeah, there it is. Yeah. Oh, kitty. I would probably still get a PSVR2 if I could play all the PSVR1 games on there. That's another hang up. I've been, my kids are Astro crazy. Also, I like it, but I didn't play a ton of it in front of them. They kind of discovered it on the PS5 themselves, and then so when the Astrobot skin dropped for free in Sackboy, we got that, and they both have been going nuts for it. So I'm like, there's Astro's rescue mission on PSVR 1. Maybe I could like set that up, and I'm like, the idea of setting up a PSVR 1 is just no way. I'm not doing that in 2024. So if I could like plug in a PSVR 2 and just have Astro work, which I don't think it does. I can double check with people, but I don't think it does. But if it did, I would probably pay $450. I don't know. $550 just seems so much more. Yeah.
It is so much. As soon as you cross that $5, it's like pricing something at $499 as opposed to $500, even though it is $500, it's $1. But something about under $5 just psychologically in our brains goes, okay, well, yeah, that's a splurge, but that's an investment. I'll pay that money, yes, but once you get over 5, I think you get into this mindset of like, that's too expensive. I'm gonna have to wait.
I think the real story here has been the story with the secondary devices from PlayStation from the beginning. You know, they had these PlayStation home consoles. They do very well. They put a lot of resources into making games for it. They have a lot of partners to make games for it. And they're like, okay, and now we're going to have the PSP. And they put a lot of effort into it, and they spent a lot of money to make bespoke games for the PSP, to have the third parties come in there and support it. And it does, you know, it kind of works to a certain extent. And then they try it again with the Vita. And it's like, well, now it's even more difficult because these games are a little bit bigger and they kind of look like big boy console games, and that's more expensive. And you know, and now we got to take away resources from these other franchises to like recreate them on the Vita, and that's getting a little out of hand. That's a bit expensive, and there's less support for the Vita than there was for the PSP, and it's like the same story here with PSVR1 to PSVR2. PSVR1 had a decent amount of support from Sony, and then PSVR2 comes out, and it just looks even worse than the Vita in a lot of ways when it comes to the support from it. And I think eventually, I think Sony does learn this lesson, that having a secondary gaming device with different games on it is a very difficult thing to do. Not even Nintendo doesn't do that anymore. And they, for the longest time, had the home and the handheld console. And they, years ago now, they just brought those two things together. They're not going to do that again. So Sony can kind of trying to keep making that happen. It's like, I think we are well past that being something that one company can actually successfully do. And at this point, if you're going to have a secondary device, it needs to be complementary to the home console in some way. And I think that's probably going to lead them to their next device will be a handheld that is just basically the same as the console, like a Steam Deck, something along those lines. All right. Next story, Gotham Knights Studio is supporting Wonder Woman game. This is from Ed Nightingale at Eurogamer. Gotham Knights Studio WB Games Montreal is supporting development on the forthcoming Wonder Woman game. I keep wanting to say Wonderwall game, which would be really stupid. Led by Monolith Productions, which created Middle-earth Shadows of Mordor, its follow-up Shadow of War, and its follow-up Shadow of War, it will similarly use the Nemesis system mechanic. According to a job description spotted by Tech4Gamers, WB Games Montreal is seeking an external development artist with a mandate to support Monolith on Wonder Woman specifically. It's not too much of a surprise to see fellow Warner Brothers studios assisting each other, especially considering Wonder Woman will be Monolith's first superhero game. WB Games Montreal previously worked on both Gotham Knights and Batman Arkham. And this says oranges in the story. Oranges. Arkham Oranges. Go on, tell Ed about his very funny typo there. That rules. So, yeah, I mean, not too surprising. And at the same time, it's like, that's just, it's indicative of where gaming's at, where like, hey, this studio, WB Games Montreal, that did put Gotham Knights out 2 years ago. They're not, it's too much to expect them to be move on to their next game now. They need to help the other studio get the game out because it's going to need so much help that's a better use of their time. But then that moves the timetable for whatever WB Games Montreal would be doing way down the road, very likely. And, you know, this is something that like we see across the industry. I remember like the Mass Effect 4, 5, I suppose, when I learned about, oh, yeah, that's getting kicked further down the road because all the people that were working on that are going back over to Dragon Age. So it's like, yeah, that's just the way it has to be these days. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's a bummer that that these studios can't focus on what they're working on to get those things out more rapidly.
You know, this is reminding me of a conversation that I had, and granted, this was in regards to movies rather than video games, but I think that, you know, video games could possibly stand this as well. What if we just had a year with film where every single film had a maximum budget of $6 million, which is, if you don't know, an extremely low budget for a feature film. Yep. So I think we need to do that with video games too. We just need a reset. We just need a year where it's like, everybody just get creative, make something small. You know, we don't need a huge ROI for this to be a success. And that's the thing, is that, again, like, look, I'm all for, you know, reallocating people rather than, canceling projects and then laying people off, obviously. But it's like, we just need to like calm down for a second and like get back to creativity and not capitalism.
Yeah. And it's just, you start thinking, it's like, man, what is this Wonder Woman game even going to be? There was
exactly.
I mean, is it just going to be basically what Arkham Oranges was, or
Arkham Oranges,
but with Wonder Woman, or are they going to go for something completely new? Is it going to have live service elements, something that WB continues to be all hot and heavy for?
Yeah.
And it's that means it's it's going to keep expanding its scope. And that means you got to bring in other studios, but I don't necessarily know that that's what anyone is asking for from Wonder Woman. I know people want to be cinematic and realistic and all these things that like do look good in commercials and screenshots. I know there's a huge audience that responds to that stuff, but at a certain point, it's like, oh man, that much effort is going into the Wonder Woman game, so that it feels like not a certain bet or anything like that.
But it's also like Gotham Knights was fine, it's like if that, and that's the problem is that this is happening so often. If you loved Spider-Man 2 and that was your game of the year, I'm so happy for you, but ultimately it was just more Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was a great game, but it was just more Spider-Man. And I mean, superheroes is the biggest example of like crazy fatigue. I think that, when it comes to games, there is a little bit more of an interest in like a really good Star Wars game, because I think that it's been a while since Star Wars has like really, really nailed it, though I do enjoy the Jedi games. But yeah, it's just like, there's so it's so much of more of the same. And I think that, again, we're in an era where I'd love to see some just new stuff that runs well and is fun.
Yep. And and we'll see. I mean, I get it when you have these studios sitting around that this maybe is the best use of their time, but you're right that fatigue does make me skeptical of all this when it comes to Wonder Woman, or even if it was like another Arkham game, even. I was just like,
Exactly. And the Arkham games, there's very good Arkham games, especially Arkham Orange.
Yep, absolutely. At the very least, I think the Nemesis system is a promising idea for Wonder Woman.
Sure.
Again. I hope that manifests in some cool ways. We'll see. All right, let's take a quick break. When we get back, more headlines, including where Persona 6 will show up right after this. All right, we are back, and let's get right back into it with Persona 6 will be coming to multiple platforms, a leak suggests. This is from Vicky Blake at Eurogamer. Persona 6 will be coming to multiple platforms, including Xbox and Switch/Switch 2. That's according to industry insiders Nate the Hate and Midori, who have each now asserted that the next installment of Atlus's fan-favorite RPG series will be coming to more platforms. From information I've heard, it does seem that Persona 6 will be coming to Xbox, Nate the Hate said on a podcast, so fans of Persona have something to look forward to. I'm not 100% sure if it's like day and date with PlayStation, but considering the way the Persona games have been day and date with the multi-platform releases at this point, it may be a safe assumption to make that Persona 6 will be day and date on Xbox and PlayStation. It would be a really big deal if Microsoft was able to secure that on Game Pass. A noted leaker Midori then jumped onto Twitter to confirm that Nate's information was correct, adding, and it's coming to multiple platforms too. They kind of followed that up by saying Switch, and then someone said, well, does that mean Switch 2? And Midori just said yes. This is the trajectory for the Persona series in Atlus. I mean, I remember a couple years ago, it might have been even like in the early days of Grubb Snacks, where we would talk about Atlus and be like, yeah, I don't know why they don't just put everything out on Switch. And then finally that stuff did get confirmed.
Yeah.
And now they do put it out on Switch. They put the Persona games out on PC, and that opened their eyes, I guess, because there was an assumption for a long time. Well, they must have a deal with PlayStation, and then some people popped up, some people who knew about Atlas and Sega and the Persona games. Are like, I don't think so. I think this is how Atlas does it. They just put it out on PlayStation and then forget. And so right, it's like, oh, okay, well, that seems
they
like
put it out and they forget. They just launch it.
That seems like they're bad at business. Yeah,
yeah.
And it's like,
exactly.
yes, that's exactly what it was.
Exactly.
And so they started putting it out more places, and surprise, it sold more. And now at in the last like 2 years ish, Atlas said, hey, we are going to support these launches as multi-platform launches going forward. And so it's not too surprising to hear that Persona 6 is going to be on other devices. It might be a little surprising still to me that it's like, oh, no, PlayStation, Switch 2, and Xbox all day one. That's a little surprising, but I think that's where they wanted to be with Persona. Yeah. And so if that's their goal for Persona 6, I'm not too surprised. What do you think?
I'm not surprised at all. I mean, it was a huge deal when the Persona games started coming to Game Pass. So if they can secure this as a day one Game Pass,
Sega's got a very good relationship with Game Pass. Yes. Huge
win for Microsoft. Huge win.
Yep.
That will make me go, okay, cool. I'll play this on Xbox instead of PlayStation, because I almost always, if it's on Xbox and PlayStation and it's something that I'm going to have to buy anyway, I always choose PlayStation. I was just a PlayStation girl. That was the console that I played the most growing up. We had an Xbox, mostly just used it to play DDR. But that being said, there is a real appeal to a JRPG on a handheld console. So it makes total sense that it would come to the Switch. That was the biggest thing that I would always see back when I would, stream Persona 5 is there'd be people in chat constantly saying, I just want it to be on the Switch. I just want it to be on the Switch. I just want it to be on the Switch, which makes total sense. And it's like, for me, if I have the option to get a gigantic game that, the graphical integrity of isn't the number one thing. Yeah, I'm going to get it on the Switch. I like being able to take stuff with me and play handheld. I don't have a Steam Deck. Congratulations to everybody who does. But that's the thing, is that like the Switch still has that just super easy support of like, here it is. It's on your console. You're playing it on your little handheld situation. Dock it. Now you're playing it on your screen. So yeah, I mean, it is very funny to me that Atlas basically just with their games, they just like set down their coffee and walked away and didn't realize like, oh, actually people want this. Oops, I guess we'll make more.
Yeah. And I think it's as simple as they just got in the habit of putting the games on PlayStation, and that was that. And which is, it looked weird at that time because so many developers had embraced multi-platform releases, and including like putting stuff out on PC. That was becoming way more popular with Japanese developers at that time. So Atlas being so far behind the curve looked odd. So now we're here. This is the kind of thing where if it's everywhere, it will sell everywhere. You're right that coming to Game Pass was something that got the Persona series a lot of attention with an audience that just had not really noticed it before, and it worked. And again, Sega has a very good relationship with Game Pass. They keep coming back to Microsoft to put more stuff on Game Pass. I think Persona 6 is there's every likelihood that it probably won't be Game Pass day and date, like day one. But I think they'll probably figure something out to get it on there 6 months.
Quickly.
6 months later, something like that. But who knows? Maybe Microsoft does like come in and cut a check for something like that. I know they think that these big Japanese games really matter to the perception of like how good of a console and ecosystem Xbox is. Well, if you really want to put your money where your mouth is on that, Persona 6 is clearly a big winner for that one. Although,
and they also
didn't get that, so I don't know. Maybe not.
Right? Yeah. I mean, they also famously passed on Baldur's Gate because they were like, Baldur's Gate, who's going to play that?
Yep. Exactly, and they regretted that, and so they don't ever want to repeat that, which it will happen, but they're going to try to avoid it where possible.
Yes.
Ex-Battlefield director doesn't have anything positive to say for EA. This is from Will Nelson at PC Games In. Battlefield game director Marcus Lato doesn't have anything positive to say about EA after departing from the publisher's Ridgeline Games earlier this year. Also known for being a co-creator of the original Halo while at Bungie, Lato left EA and Ridgeline just as EA announced it was gutting 5% of its workforce alongside the full closure of the studio. Ridgeline Games was formally revealed in 2022, with Lato set to lead the development of a single-player Battlefield game following Battlefield 2042, with fellow EA studio Ripple Effect working on a bigger Battlefield project. Lato left EA and the FPS game earlier this year, right as EA laid off that 5% of its workforce, around 670 people. These layoffs also resulted in the closure of Ridgeline Games, with the single-player Battlefield experience moving over to Criterion. After saying that he left EA on my own accord back in February 2024, Lato has now released another short statement on his departure. Not been saying much here since I don't have anything positive to say about EA, my recent departure, and how so many, including my team, are suffering due to the industry's sweeping layoffs, Lato said. It definitely feels like this is the kind of situation where a lot of people that kind of came back into these big publishers, especially a company like EA, because EA's like, hey, we're reinvesting, we're starting up studios, we want to work on more stuff with Battlefield. You know, it's 2021, 2022, like times are, you know, we got plenty of fat to work with here. There's plenty of money here. We're going to make a bunch of the stuff. And then 2 years later, all that stuff evaporates. These people that have to have some sort of whiplash where it's like, God, we just came in here, we thought we had the support, and then their tone must have just changed drastically when like someone like Lato is talking to the executives at EA, and now suddenly they're like, yeah, we're not just going to not make the game, we're laying off everybody. This is done. I would be pretty frustrated as well, and I don't blame Lato for leaving, and it's just a shame that so many people got laid off as part of that. But yeah, EA is a company that felt like it was finding a little bit of its voice coming out of, everything had to be live service. And then they started making some successful, they did have a couple of successful live service games, and then they started making more successful single player games. And it's like, okay, they're kind of getting their mojo back here and figuring it out. And now it just feels like, that's out the window. And this cutthroat company is back to just doing what it needs to scrape by and extract as much value from the player as possible. I don't have much positive feelings about EA these days either. Emma, how about you?
No, I can't say that I do. Yeah, this just goes back to what I was saying earlier. We need to stop with the big games. Everybody go back, make nice games that look nice, that run well, that are a maximum of like 20 hours. And aren't super expensive. Let's just get back to creativity. Because, I mean, like, how do you keep up? It's like, as you say, EA is trying to scrape the bottom line and get every last dollar that they can out of their players. I feel sad about the state of the world, and I think that is being reflected in what's going on here, and that Lato is totally within his rights to, you know, basically what's happening is that human beings are being treated as commodities, and not people. Right. And it's like, if you are not working on something that ultimately is going to benefit the company's bottom line, then you're out.
Yep. And it's you are resources to be fed into the machine or to be cut off once become a liability. And it's when all those layoffs were happening, I said this a bunch of times, I'll repeat it. There was a time when laying off a bunch of workers to save your company money was unheard of, unthinkable, and no one ever would have done it. And then, you know, the 70s and 80s come along and it became much, much more popular. And now it's the norm. And we take some responsibility for the society that we live in, right? At a certain point, it's like, man, maybe it shouldn't be this way. And yet we keep moving along as if it's normal, and it's just not. It's completely abnormal and insane that this is the way it works. Making smaller games. I think this is what has attracted me so much to like early access and Steam stuff, where it's like all this stuff is just either so creative or weird, and a lot of it's bad, but bad in a fun way.
Totally.
That I'm like, yeah, this is where I'm happiest right now.
Yeah.
All right, Helldivers 2 is selling well ahead of expectations, having potentially hit 8 million in sales. This is from Oshin Kunke. I can never get. I think it's Oshin.
Yeah, I think you're right.
At VGC 24/7, with all the server issues the game has had, you likely won't be surprised to hear that Helldivers 2 has probably sold exceptionally well. Helldivers 2 has obviously been the surprise hit of the year, with developer Arrowhead constantly having to limit how many people can actually play the game within the first few weeks of launch, and scores of players working together to unlock things like mechs and more. Now, as reported by Bloomberg, we should have a better idea of just how well the game is doing. According to TD Cowen analyst Doug Kruitz, Helldivers 2 is estimated to sold as many as 8 million copies, with numbers continuing to grow every week. We believe the game has performed well ahead of expectations, Kruitz wrote in a note last week. 8 million copies sold, and again, that's an estimation from an analyst, but it's probably true. I mean, it feels like it's sold that well. That is very, very good for a kind of new game coming out of nowhere and taking over. That like most PlayStation like single player narrative like AAA blockbuster games, they come out, and if they have sold 8 million by this point, that is an enormous success. And then they try to get to about 10, 12, 15 million, and if they get to that 15 million, then they're enormous successes. They're like very few games like that have sold more than 15 million copies. And this game seems destined to do that probably in its first year. So just a massive success, right?
Yeah, I love a happy story like this after the huge bummer that is literally anything EA. Yeah, I mean, like this when people are, asking to, is anybody want to play this drop-in kind of game, it's always Helldivers. I have so many friends that are deeply into this game, and yeah, I mean, it's like good for them, because like I don't. The first Helldivers is a blip to me, kind of like came and went, don't really have any particular memory of it, and to me, certainly Helldivers 2 is very much in the cultural zeitgeist of gaming. Like everybody in the gaming world, and even people that are sort of like on the outskirts of it, this is a title that is crossing over, certainly not in the way that something like a Mario or a Zelda or Pokemon gains kind of recognition amongst the general public. But
that's right.
Again, Helldivers is doing well enough that and here's a little inside baseball in the advertising world of digital video, we have clients literally asking about doing content around Helldivers 2 because they have heard it. And these are people who they are not gamers. Yep. And they're asking, would Helldivers 2 be a good fit for this? And I have to go, not really.
But you're right. I mean, it is in that zeitgeist point where it's like similar to what Elden Ring did, similar to a handful of other games in the last couple of years, where it is the trend on TikTok. And if you can get to that zone, it's clear that you are some massive hit that a lot of the vast majority of games will never get close to.
Correct.
I played a little bit more over the weekend, finally, after take some time off. And Helldivers 2 is still very good, and I'm going to play a lot more of it. I'm going to try to get some more on this website, too, everybody, so look out. Modder claims Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection used their work without permission. This is from Jordan Midler at VGC. A modder has claimed that Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection has used some of his work without permission. Prior to release, modder I Am Shaman claimed that footage of Star Wars Battlefront Classic Collection that appeared in a trailer suggested that developer Aspyr was using his mod. Following this, Aspyr released a statement claiming it had mistakenly used footage of this mod and that it was a placeholder. Now, following the full release, players appear to have discovered evidence that prior to a very last-minute patch, the game shipped with the uncredited mod work. Footage noticed by IGN shows a player on Reddit showing off the character Asajj Ventress using what appears to be I Am Shaman's mod. While the current version of the game has removed these animations, Aspyr has yet to comment on how I Am Shaman's work appeared in the game, despite their claims that they used no uncredited work on the remaster project. On Friday, Aspyr addressed criticism of the launch, encouraging players to report any issue, because there's been a lot of other problems with the game for a lot of people, mostly connection issues, but some bugs as well. These Aspire Star Wars remasters, and I do this scare quotes because most of the time they are just straight up re-releases, ports. Really is what they are. They are. I'm not sure how I feel about them at the end of the day, Emma. Where it's I'm glad that these games get a chance to come back out and that they're accessible and I can play them on the Switch. That's pretty cool. But it also feels like, boy, they are just bare bones. And I got, you know what? That's an option too. I'm mostly fine with that part, but it does feel like they are like scraping by and trying to get away with the least amount of work possible. That's the part where I'm like, oh, it's kind of obvious that that's the case. And stuff like this makes it all the more glaring that it's like, maybe they were like sneaking some of this mod stuff in there and hoping to get away with it because that would have made it look a little bit better. But at the end of the day, they weren't crediting or paying the people that did the work. And they didn't want to, apparently. So they just took it out instead of making some deal to make that stuff happen. At the end of the day, I think I feel that these Aspire Star Wars ports are kind of not scummy, but close to it. I don't know. How do you feel?
Well, as you say, it's the bare minimum. You are basically, it reminds me a little bit of, I think it was in 2020 that Nintendo released that like Mario collection. And it was games, for example, that had remastered versions. You know, if it was like N64, then, you know, there was a GameCube version of it, or you know, more likely a you know, Nintendo DS version, which that's a whole other thing. But I think that again, there literally was no quality of life improvements. It was just a straight port, and it just ran a little faster because the Switch loads faster than the N64. So like that, as you say, is what goes on with these Aspire games. Do I think that it is nice that they exist in some capacity, that people are able to play them? Yes, I do, because by and large, especially if you look back at like old gaming magazines and things like that, you know, there are all these games in there that I have no recollection of whatsoever because the games industry has done a very bad job of preserving its own history. And that is something. So again, having the option to access these games is great because they're not just forever lost to time. But if you're going to attach a monetary value to them of any kind of significance, there should be an incentive, but instead they're just capitalizing on people's nostalgia. Yep.
It's, I mean, and you're right. And they are attaching a significant like price point. Like this game was $35, I think $40 in that range on Steam. And I think on Switch and all that stuff, it's expensive. And so that makes all the stuff all the more glaring. And I think that, listen, if it's a choice between fewer things that's happening with Star Wars overall and what Aspire's doing, I do still choose what Aspire's doing. It's you know, the KOTOR games got re-released on Switch, and that, you know, that's cool. I'm glad that that's available. I'll take it. But boy, it feels like we should be getting better for Star Wars than this. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, man, that like Warhammer 40K seems like it gets treated a little bit better than what like Aspire. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of like little interesting Warhammer games every couple of months. They get something new, like a bolt gun. It's like, okay, well, listen, the Star Wars Dark Forces remaster is really good, but that wasn't Aspire. That was Night Dive Studio, and that stands out. That's fantastic. But over at Warhammer, they're getting a whole new one of those, like out of nowhere, and they got, you know, and that's right after 4 other games got released. It's like, man, I mean, not that all those Warhammer games are great or anything, but I still think what's happening over there is interesting, and what's happening over with Star Wars and Aspire is kind of sad and depressing. So, I hope we get past this phase here pretty soon, and we get into more interesting stuff for Star Wars in games. Final headline here, real quick: Balatro's cleared 1 million copies sold. That's well done. I played a ton more Balatro over the weekend. We did a Friday stream of that, and I was looking at the other guys had way more unlocked. I'm like, okay, fine, I'm gonna sit down and really play a lot more. And I got like 4 more wins or whatever, 3 or 4 more wins, and did that with a bunch of different decks. So now I'm fully back into Balatro. And it's a problem because I didn't play a bunch of other games I intended to play over the weekend. So fantastic.
Just Balatro all the time.
Just Balatro all the time. All right. I got a poll question. We're going to get that set up. While I do that, though, Emma, why don't you tell people what you have going on, where they can find you on the internet, and all that good stuff?
Yes. Hello. I am at Emma Fyffe across social media platforms that I don't particularly use. I got a great, if you've finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I got a great ending explained video up over on GameSpot. It is unhinged, and ultimately, I don't think I explain anything. I believe the top comment is, "Thank you for trying," which is apt. Yeah, so you can go check that out, and that's me. That's what I got going on.
All right. The poll question is Sonic Cross Angry Birds that crossover event of the year? Which is how Sega described it. 27% said yes. 73% said, of course, yes. Those are your two options, everybody. Yeah, this is a weird one. I keep forgetting every day of my life that Sega bought Rovio and owns Angry Birds now. That's such a weird thing to me. But Angry
Bird, new Sonic. Now in Sonic games, instead of releasing cute little animals, remember you'd like jump on the thing and all the cute little animals would come out. Now it's just Angry
Birds come out.
Angry Birds.
Fantastic. God, that should be the one thing that changes. That should be the crossover event of the year right there. All right. New poll question. Do you have a PSVR2? Yes, no, but I plan to get one. And the third one is no, and I don't want one. So yes, no, but I plan to get one. And then no, I don't plan to get one. All right. That will be the poll question we discuss on Game Mess Mornings on Wednesday here on Giant Bomb. Speaking of Giant Bomb, tomorrow it's the Bombcast. We're back. Tune into that. You're not going to want to miss it. And then we will have a whole bunch of other stuff this week. Blight Club will be back. Man, it was a great Blight Club episode. That's 2 in a row for Super Dan 64, the Dan of Steel. It's been fantastic. But then there's been those great animations from Pickle Giraffe, I think is his name, and he puts them out on Twitter and YouTube, where he takes some scenes and kind of rotoscopes and animates them. And the latest one that popped off last night, I was getting out of Dune 2 right as he tweeted it, and I'm opening the door, laughing really loud and making people look at me and like I'm strange, and I was, but it cracked me up. It's so well done, so people should check that out. I retweeted it. But either way, a lot of fun stuff happening with Blight Club, and then we'll have Voicemail Dump Truck, UPF, all that stuff. Look out for it and more on giantbomb.com this week, everybody. All right, I think with that, Emma, thank you so much for spending today talking with me about video games. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Always happy to stand up for creativity.
That's right. Finally. Someone will. No one else is, but we got to do it here. Thank you all for watching. You're the best audience in gaming. Until next time, have a good one. Take care of yourself, and goodbye.